Good evening, Philippines, and good day, world. It's Saturday, December 16, 2023, and you're watching Newsline World. I'm Yna Mortel. We will bring you the top stories we've gathered from all over the globe. President Bongbong Marcos is in Japan to attend the ASEAN-JAPAN Commemorative Summit. More than 20,000 people have been killed on both Israeli and Palestinian sides as the war between Israel and Hamas grinds on. U.S. lawmakers approve a huge $886 billion defense spending bill. Hungary blocks a $54 billion aid for Ukraine, although the bloc has opened talks for Kyiv's membership. And the presidents of Venezuela and Guyana agreed not to use force amid the dispute on the oil-rich region of Essequibo. These and more for tonight's edition of Newsline World. Lawmakers in the United States have passed a huge military spending bill worth nearly $1 trillion, and President Joe Biden is expected to sign this measure into law. Carlo De La Peña reports.
U.S. representatives approved a record $886 billion defense bill during a voting session in Washington, and now the proposal will be forwarded to the country's President Joe Biden. The U.S. Congress voted to approve the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA.
The yeas are 310, the nays are 118, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The conference report is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
It was also passed during the Senate in an 87-13 vote. The bill included a pay raise for the U.S. troops and the possibility of the purchase of weaponry, including ammunition, aircraft, and ships. It also includes $300 million in additional aid for Ukraine, which is a tiny percentage of what was originally sought for the country by the White House. It is also reported that the bill includes a short-term extension of a surveillance program that aims to prevent terrorism and identity potential spies. The measure reportedly establishes a new training program with Taiwan, consolidates a plan to accelerate deliveries of Harpoon anti-ship missiles to the country, and approves an agreement that allows Australia to access nuclear-powered submarines. Meanwhile, although the new NDAA bill already includes $300 million for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative through the year 2026, American legislators are still working out a separate $105 billion bill that would provide more military aid to Ukraine and Israel. The $886 billion defense bill is so far the largest military spending authorization in U.S. history. The bill was passed separately in the House and the Senate earlier in 2023. However, it faced long negotiations with lawmakers struggling to create a final version to send to Biden's desk. The bill's approval comes 2 days after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the U.S. Congress. Last week, the Senate blocked the Biden administration's bid for $100 billion in funding for Ukraine, Israel, and other projects. Republicans and U.S. analysts have also expressed concerns about the scale of the total funding for Kyiv and the lack of a breakthrough in the latest counteroffensive. Following the latest budget setback, Biden claimed that Republicans were willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damaged our national security in the process. The U.S. has provided $111 billion in total to Ukraine during the conflict with Russia. But Moscow has repeatedly accused Washington and its allies of interfering and escalating the conflict and said that deliveries of weaponry will only prolong the fighting and won't change the outcome. Reporting, this has been Carlo De La Peña, SMNI News.
Hungary has blocked the European Union's plan to provide tens of billions of money in aid to Ukraine after a tense overnight session of the European Council in Brussels. Jane Cadnita reports.
EU member Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban put his foot down and vetoed the deal that would have provided Ukraine 50 billion euros or $54 million. Orban's move delayed the deal until January 2024. The Hungarian Prime Minister took to X and shared the news, saying that he had vetoed the deal. In his post, Orban said, and quote, Summary of the night shift. Veto for the extra money to Ukraine. Veto for the MFF review. We will come back to the issue next year in the European Council after proper preparation. The Multi-Annual Financial Framework, or MFF, is EU's long-term budget. The blocking of aid for Ukraine was announced by Orban shortly after other EU leaders decided to open membership talks with Ukraine and Moldova, as well as to grant candidate status to Georgia. Meanwhile, EU Chief Jean-Michel said leaders would return to the issue in early 2024, saying that he does not want to go too much into the details of the issue, as he wants to work with colleagues in the days to come. The proposed plan by the European Commission would amend the joint EU budget. Brussels wanted to allocate the said $54 billion for Kyiv in spending stretched over 4 years. But Hungary opposed the plan, arguing that any aid should be for a shorter term and pending renewal after review. Hungary also refused to fund it through the joint budget. Earlier, Orban reiterated his government's stance to having EU membership talks with Ukraine, but after the Hungarian Prime Minister abstained on the vote, Michel announced that negotiations have been approved after 8 hours of debates. But Orban criticized the decision, saying that it was completely senseless, irrational, and incorrect, and that Hungary was not part of it. Hungary does not believe that Ukraine has made sufficient progress in implementing the reforms demanded by the EU in order to join the bloc. Although Hungary has long opposed the EU membership for Ukraine, but did not veto that move. Reports emerged that Orban left the negotiating room for a while the other 26 EU leaders went ahead with the vote. Reporting, this has been Jane Conita, ASEAN News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin held the 18th annual press conference in Moscow, where he held a Q&A with journalists from various countries. Yna Mortel reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin conducted the 18th annual press conference in Moscow, which included a direct line question and answer session with journalists and Russian citizens. During the session, questions were submitted on various issues, including local and foreign policy, political matters, and the situation in Russia. The session on Wednesday evening received an overwhelming 2 million questions. In the press conference, Putin announced that Russia's national gross domestic product, or GDP, is projected to rise by 3.5% by the end of 2023. The processing industry is expected to experience growth of 7.5% by the end of the year, while the unemployment rate may potentially increase to 3%. The year-end inflation rate in Russia is projected to reach 7.5 to 8%. Putin emphasized that Russia's financial system remains stable and the national debt continues to decrease. Corporate profits in the country grew by 24% in 2023, and the salaries of ordinary residents are expected to increase by 8%. Russia's use of its currency in international trade was also discussed, with Putin stating that Russia does not seek to rival the dollar. However, there are instances where its use may impact the economy and potentially undermine the country's sovereignty. When it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Putin stated that the goal of the so-called special military operation remains to strengthen border security and ensure the rights and freedom of its citizens. He stressed that Moscow was compelled to launch the military operation because Ukraine refused negotiations on its demilitarization. Regarding relations with the United States, Putin expressed Russia's readiness to negotiate but cited the imperial thinking of Washington as a significant obstacle. He also emphasized that the United States and the European Union have damaged their own relations with Russia. Reporting, this has been Yna Mortel, ASEAN News.
In other news, Russian President Vladimir Putin ruled out an additional wave of mobilization in Ukraine, saying that there are more than 500,000 Russian soldiers in conflict zones. Carlo de la Peña has the details.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said his country does not need to announce additional mobilization to replenish army ranks in conflict zones. Putin made the remarks during an annual question and answer session on Thursday. The Russian president called the issue of another wave of mobilization a sensitive question. To recall, Russia announced a partial military call-up last fall where tens of thousands sign up to fight amid the ongoing conflict with Ukraine. Russia announced partial mobilization in September 2022. Putin said there are around 244,000 mobilized Russian troops currently deployed in the conflict zone, and 486,000 volunteers have signed contracts with the Defense Ministry. Meanwhile, 41,000 had been discharged either for health reasons or because they reached the maximum age. The Russian president said, quote, "Together with the volunteers, there are 500,000 people. Why do we need mobilization? For today, there is no need." End of quote. Russian officials, including Putin, had repeatedly said that Ukraine's counteroffensive had failed. Earlier in December, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu estimated that Ukraine had suffered over 125,000 casualties since June of this year. Russia announced partial mobilization in September 2022. Reporting, this has been Carlo de la Peña, SMNI News.
The United States and its allies are considering options on how to respond to the increasing attacks launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. Tricia Molina has the details.
The U.S. once again warned Houthi rebels to stop their attacks after the militant group started targeting commercial ships in the vicinity of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea in recent weeks. There have been at least 92 attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, launched by Iranian-backed groups. Since last week, Washington revealed it is consulting with allies on appropriate action in response to the latest drone and missile attacks in the Red Sea by the Houthis. The rebel group has launched more than 70 drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel, which is more than 1,000 miles away from Yemen since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. The Israeli Navy sent a warship to the Red Sea to respond to threats from Houthis. The U.S. has blamed Iran for using its proxies to attack American personnel in the region after the U.S. showed support for Israel and its ongoing war with Hamas. Iran denied its involvement in the October 7 attack launched by Hamas and said that resistance groups in the region are acting independently. Reporting for Newsline World, Tricia Molina, SMNI News.
Filipino workers are expected to return soon to Kuwait after both countries made efforts to settle their differences concerning a labor dispute that took place in mid-2023. Melchizedek Cadiz reports.
The recruitment of overseas Filipino workers or OFWs in Kuwait is on the horizon after a recent meeting between Filipino and Kuwaiti officials turned productive. Both teams agreed to resume employment of Filipino workers both in Kuwait's domestic and private sectors, as well as overcome future challenges under a new mechanism that is in line with the Kuwaiti law. The new working mechanism puts an end to any future suspension and activates the role of the shelter in a way that guarantees the rights of workers. To recall, Kuwait suspended the issuance of all visas for Filipino workers in May in response to what is said was Philippine authorities' failure to comply with a labor agreement previously reached between the two countries. More than 275,000 documented Filipinos live and work in Kuwait based on the latest figures. Meanwhile, 50 OFWs from Kuwait arrived in the Philippines on Friday. The OWA airport team made sure to make the OFWs feel at home by welcoming them with the necessary help and support, such as food assistance, transportation assistance to go home to their provinces, hotel accommodation if needed, as well as financial assistance. Reporting, this has been Melchizedek Cadiz, SMNI News, Kuwait.
The current round of Israel-Palestine conflict has claimed over 20,000 lives on both sides since Hamas launched its attacks on Israel on October 7th. The Health Department of Palestine and the Gaza Strip recently announced that at least 18,608 Palestinians were killed and 50,594 injured. To recall, the Israeli Defense Military reported that 10 of their soldiers were killed, mostly in ambushes by Hamas soldiers. Israeli media stated that it was the highest single-day loss of Israeli military personnel since October 31st. Furthermore, the Israeli military continued its operation in Jenin West Bank. The Al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas, claimed to have exchanged fire with Israeli soldiers. Also, the Israel Defense Forces recently announced that 70 Hamas gunmen surrendered to their troops at the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. These Hamas operatives are also turned over their firearms and equipment and were taken to be questioned by the Shin Bet and Israeli military intelligence. Meanwhile, the first batch of the 9th Chinese Peacekeeping Infantry Battalion to the United Nations mission in South Sudan returned to China after successfully completing a one-year peacekeeping mission in the Central African country. Anissa de Guzman has the details.
The battalion was deployed to South Sudan in December last year and performed major tasks such as security patrols, armed escorts, and conflict isolation. The battalion conducted over 330 security patrols during the one-year period and also made efforts to promote women's and children's rights. Meanwhile, the first batch of 350 soldiers who are members of China's 10th Peacekeeping Infantry Battalion left the country on Thursday for South Sudan after an oath-taking rally. A political struggle in 2013 caused fighting among two of the largest ethnic groups in South Sudan. There has been slow progress since the end of the civil war in 2018. The situation worsened in April 2023 when fighting erupted in Sudan, wherein more than 7.7 million people, or two-thirds of the population, faced a severe food crisis. Reporting for Newsline World, Anissa de Guzman, SMNI News.
Tensions have somewhat de-escalated between Venezuela and Guyana after its leaders agreed not to use force in claiming for the oil-rich territory of Essequibo, a region that makes up two-thirds of Guyana. Andrea Santos reports.
The president of Guyana, Irfan Ali, and his Venezuelan counterpart, Nicolas Maduro, held tense talks amid the crisis between the two countries over the dispute over the oil-rich region of Essequibo. With a shake of hands, both promised to resolve the conflict about said territory. Ali said that the International Court would be the one to resolve the dispute between the two countries. Guyana's president also said that he already made it very clear that his country has all the rights of Essequibo. Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, also manifested and said that only resolution for that is the dialogue. Venezuela once again claimed the territory of Essequibo on the border between the two countries. In recent years, after the discovery of reserve with the potential to produce around 11 billion barrels of offshore oil and gas, Venezuela also organized a referendum claim to Essequibo. Before the vote, the International Court of Justice decided that the Venezuelan government should refrain from taking any type of action that could change the situation in the territory. However, the court did not prevent the referendum from taking place. Result: Maduro's government said that more than 95% of the population voted to annex the territory, which makes up 70% of Guyana. Days later, the Venezuelan leader announced the creation of Guyana's Essequibo Integral Defense Zone and appointed a general as the sole authority in the area. Guyana's President Irfan Ali considered the measure a threat to the territory and called for a meeting of the United Nations Security Council. It can be noted that the tension between Venezuela and Guyana soared after American company ExxonMobil discovered a large reserve of oil in the waters of the disputed territory in 2015. Reporting, this has been Andrea Santos, SMNI News.
The Prime Minister of Thailand will go on a 4-day leave after attending an important summit in Japan. Chatmong Kompiso Maygoson has the news.
Sethar Thavisin will take a short break from Prime Minister duties next week after attending the ASEAN-JAPAN Commemorative Summit in the capital of Tokyo.
The ASEAN-JAPAN Summit is scheduled from December 16 to 18, 2023. Sethar is scheduled to return to Thailand on Monday, December 18, and will take a short leave from December 19 to 22. The Prime Minister will share a cabinet meeting in the morning before he goes on leave in the afternoon. He will stay with his family in Phuket a popular tourist destination in Thailand, before returning to work on December 22. The Thai premier earlier this week said he felt heavy-hearted when it comes to the country's economic prospects in 2024 as the administration seeks to address the current economic crisis.
The Prime Minister's Deputy Secretary General said that SETA deserves a much-needed break after more than 3 months of demanding and restless work. รายงานจากราชบุรี นายชัดมงคลพิสมัยโกศล ASEAN News ประเทศไทย สวัสดีครับ
President Bongbong Marcos is in Japan to participate in the ASEAN-JAPAN Commemorative Summit, highlighting invitations to investors for the country's renewable energy sector, a key focus for the president. President Katarong reports.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is now in Japan with the Philippine delegation to take part in the Commemorative Summit, marking 50 years of friendship and cooperation between Japan and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. PBBM's attendance at the summit follows an invitation from Prime Minister Kishida Fumio. Before leaving the Philippines, Marcos made a departure statement at Villamor Air Base in Pasay City on Friday afternoon, wherein he said that his attendance aims to strengthen the Philippines' position in the global community and emphasize the progress in ASEAN-Japan relations. Marcos stated that this final ASEAN-related summit of the year is also an opportunity to welcome the conferment of comprehensive partner status to Japan. Japan is considered a trusted and reliable partner of ASEAN in peace, economic development, and community building over the past 50 years.
I will highlight that the ASEAN-Japan relationship has inexorably evolved and progressed over the past 5 decades, particularly in shared commitments towards peace and security, trade and investment, food security, climate action, energy security, supply chain resilience, infrastructure development, and now connectivity.
President Marcos further mentioned that the summit will serve as a platform for the Philippines to collaborate and secure investments for the renewable energy industry, aligning with the goals of the Asia Zero Emission Community and the Paris Agreement.
On the heels of the ASEAN-Japan Summit will be the Asia Zero Emission Community, or AZEC, leaders meeting. And that will apprise the AZEC partner countries of the current Philippine initiatives towards promoting a clean energy transition.
The commemorative summit will feature 3 sessions within the ASEAN-Japan framework. The first session will focus on community building efforts and Japan's consistent support for ASEAN centrality and a rules-based international order. The second session will highlight the heart-to-heart partnership across generations. And the final summit program, the co-creation of economy and society of the future, is expected to include President Marcos, bringing the Philippine economic team led by Trade Secretary Alfredo Pascual.
I shall reassure ASEAN member states and Japan that as a permanent country coordinator for ASEAN-Japan economic relations, the Philippines will always continue to shepherd ASEAN initiatives and projects with Japan, not only to co-create a region of economic prosperity, but also an inclusive society that is ready for the future.
For God and for my beloved Philippines, this has been Cresceline Catarong, SMN News.
An international lawyer raised concerns on what the proposed charter change could bring to the Philippines. Daniela Polite has the details.
International lawyer attorney Arnedo Valera is not in favor of proposed charter change by the House of Representatives, asserting that this change would have negative effects on the political and economic stability of the Philippines.
Bad timing ang nakikita ko rito, no? Hindi po kailangan ng sambayanang Pilipino ang charter change at this time. Magdudulot lang po yan ng economic and political instability sa ating bansa.
Attorney Valera stressed the importance of examining the potential effects on the political and economic stability of the country before implementing charter change. Some of the possible effects of charter change as seen by Attorney Valera include
magiging divisive ito. That's number 1. And introducing a charter change at this juncture will and can potentially lead to social unrest.
Valera also pointed out the untimely proposal of charter change, especially as it is being politicized for personal interest. For the international lawyer, changing the constitution may result in policy unpredictability.
Kasi may risk na yung proseso ng charter change ay pwedeng ma-misuse for personal or political gain instead na maging benepisyo ito sa sambayanan, no? So again, ang nakikita ko dito, mas maglilid pa nga ito to corruption and panghihina or weakening of our democratic institutions.
Attorney Valera reminded that while reforms are important, the public must remain cautious in this matter. He also calls on Congress to allow the legislative agenda of President Bongbong Marcos Jr. to unfold and not to create laws that will lead to the disintegration of the country.
Kung inaamin ng ating Kongreso na yung legislative agenda, pangunahing legislative agenda ni Pangulong BBM ay nandito na at nakafix na yung framework, iyon ang ating suportahan ng todo. Huwag na tayong mag-create pa ng any type of environment na kung saan ay magkakaroon ng divisiveness between and amongst Filipino people.
It can be noted that House Speaker Martin Romualdez wants to push for charter change in the future to draw attention to economic provisions, but some senators have already expressed their opposition to it. For God and my beloved country, this has been Daniela Paulite, ASEAN-JAPAN News.
A Christmas bazaar organized by the Filipino Kiwi community has attracted hundreds of locals and featured the Filipino way of celebrating the annual holiday. Jane Zaniza for the details.
Kia ora. With Christmas fast approaching, the Pinoy New Zealand Bazaar Caravan organized a very traditional way of celebrating the yearly festivities. The event captivated hundreds of locals, not only in Auckland, but also in other regions. This is the 5th anniversary of the highly festive Paskuhan sa Auckland Christmas Bazaar, following its rising popularity in the previous years. The annual event resembles the Philippines' traditional way of street vending style, with more than 50 local businesses, mostly Filipino-owned, stretched out side by side to showcase various Filipino cuisines and businesses. Hundreds of Filipinos and Kiwis alike, not only from Auckland but other regions as well, travel every year to witness the heartwarming Filipino Christmas spirit in action. The event also featured a Pilipinas Got Talent show with live performances from local musicians, dancers, and other various artists. Organizers emphasize that the occasion does not only highlight the Filipino culture during the most wonderful time of the year, but also how it is closely intertwined with the Kiwi community. Attendees enjoyed a range of beautiful Filipino-made merchandise. Different agencies that support the specific needs of immigrants or longtime residents in the community were also highlighted. The event is supported and sponsored by the local Auckland Council and various local businesses. Attendees revel at such a great display of culture as the event unites the entire community every year.
So, hi, my name is Thomas, and this is my first time coming here. And we have a cafe at Newland. We decided to come here, enjoy the time. Definitely gonna come back next year again, and seeing people happy Christmas time is enjoyable. So.
Yes, it's Christmas season for us, especially for Filipinos. So it's really good venues to bring your families and come and share, the spirit of Christmas.
Overall, the event was hailed as a great success, clearly proving that Filipinos carry that unique and vibrant spirit of Christmas wherever in the world they may be. Reporting from Auckland, this has been Jane Siniza, ASEAN-JAPAN News, New Zealand.
Dozens of passengers were left stranded in mid-air after a roller coaster in Japan came to a sudden stop. Kyoko Hashimoto has this story.
Flying Dinosaur roller coaster at Universal Studios in Osaka, Japan left 32 passengers suspended about 40 meters above ground earlier this week. A 5-second clip of the incident has gone viral since it was posted on social media platform X. The passengers were seen suspended in mid-air with their heads facing the ground. The passengers were evacuated safely and no one sustained any injuries. It is still unclear what caused the roller coaster to stop mid-air. The ride was safe after an hour and a half of tests conducted by engineers. A similar incident involving the Flying Dinosaur roller coaster happened in 2018 when more than 60 passengers were stuck in mid-air for up to 2 hours. Izo Hashimoto, Kyoko Nihon kara hukukutashimashita, SM9 News, Japan.
President Bongbong Marcos announced that he might sign the proposed 2024 national budget before Christmas. Val Divinagracia has the details.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. revealed that he is considering signing the proposed 5.768 trillion pesos national budget for the fiscal year 2024 before Christmas. In a recent media interview in Muntinlupa City, PBBM said he is waiting for the bicameral report of the proposed national budget. Once the report reaches his office and is finalized, he will promptly affix his signature.
So certainly, the minute it is finalized, then we will immediately, of course, pass the budget. We have been going through the consultations through the whole of the year, for that matter, and I would be very surprised if there are other issues that will suddenly arise that we hadn't anticipated, or hadn't resolved, put it that way. So I don't see any problem to that.
On December 11, the Bicameral Conference Committee approved the final version of the proposed national budget for the coming year. The 2024 budget also aims to support farmers with subsidies for irrigation, free seeds, fertilizers, and other tools, and ensures continued provision of free health care, quality hospital services, and medication for those in need. Furthermore, the budget highlights additional funding allocated to the Department of National Defense in the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Senator Sonny Angara, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, mentioned that there is no allocation for confidential and intelligence funds for non-security agencies under the unified version of the 2024 General Appropriations Bill. According to Angara, only 9 billion pesos or 0.02% of the total proposed budget is allocated for confidential and intelligence funds in the coming year. For God and my beloved country, the Philippines, this is Val Divinagracia, SM9 News.
The supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte ignited fervor as they clashed with leftist lawmakers in Quezon City. MJ Mondihar reports.
This is how ACT Teachers Representative Franz Castro was greeted as she exited her vehicle at the Quezon City Prosecutor's Office. Castro faced jeers and shouts from supporters of former President Rodrigo Duterte and Anti-Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or Anti-CPP-NPA-NDF. Left-wing members of ACT Teachers felt embarrassed by Duterte supporters. The supporters gathered early outside the Quezon City Prosecutor's Office to back the filing of a counter-affidavit by the Duterte camp. This responds to the complaint filed by leftist Castro against the former president. So, early in the morning, diehard Duterte supporters held a spirited mini-rally. Many of them came from Visayas and Mindanao. The group also carried placards with the slogan Protect Sara, referring to Vice President Sara Duterte amid the intense political maneuvering around her.
Nandito lang kami para magbigay ng suporta sa ating dating Pangulong Rodrigo Roa Duterte doon sa hinain na kaso laban sa kanya. Hinahangaan ko siya noon pa, kinampanya ko siya.
Duterte supporters have only recently shown movement. The group claims that millions across the Philippines are watching the current government's performance. And, together with the former president, they're challenging the lawmakers in Congress who are elected by the people to open the books.
So bilang isang public servant, karapatan namin na malaman kung saan napupunta ang pera ng kaban ng bayan.
Siguro, sinasound off lang nila yung panawagan ni Pangulong Duterte na magkaroon ng transparency sa gobyerno.
Supporters hope that the former president remains steadfast against the left's criticism. They express unwavering support for VP Sara, whatever may happen.
With that, the group is committed to give support to the former president, and if it's necessary, they will conduct rallies and protests in the coming days ahead. For Guyana Mobile of Philippines, I'm Jay Mondeha, SM9 News.
And before we end, may be inspired with the message of the appointed Son of God. What your faith can conceive, you can achieve. And for Christmas countdown, it's only 9 days to go before Christmas. And that's all for today's edition of Newsline World. For more updates, you may visit sbnewschannel.com or follow us on our official social media accounts on Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you for watching, and we thank our beloved Pastor Apollo C. Kublay, for the opportunity to be a part of this program. For God and my beloved country, the Philippines, I'm Yna Mortel, and this is Newsline World.